Well, old Justin Amash is officially an independent member of Congress now. He wrote an op-ed this past week saying that he is leaving the GOP after, I would assume, his entire life. And that's a pretty bold thing to do for anybody who's an active member of Congress, because members of Congress, unlike, say, senators, don't really have enough clout to fundraise on their own for the most part. Normally they have to rely on the central party infrastructure to funnel them money for re-election. The parties have worked for a long time to centralize all the donor money, and in fact, even though every individual member of Congress has to work very hard to fundraise, they fundraise, as I understand it, for the party itself, not for their own campaign. And so everyone has to work to bring in money, but then the party leadership decides how to dole it out. And that's an effective way of controlling your cohort in Congress. Make sure that nobody within your party steps too far outside the line. I'll give you a good example of somebody like, say, Susan Collins or Rand Paul, who are considered kind of mavericks within the GOP. They tend to take a lot of votes or stands against what the party leadership does. That is the case, but they're not really defying the will of the party leadership. They do that sort of with permission a lot of the time, because it's understood that both of them were elected as not mainstream Republicans. Rand Paul was elected more as a libertarian-ish kind of guy, and Susan Collins was elected as a very moderate to sort of liberal woman, and so they let them take stands like that so that they can, live up to their campaign promises. But they never do that when, say, the party really needs their vote. Susan Collins is not going to, say, vote against Brett Kavanaugh and cost him his seat on the Supreme Court. Same thing with Rand Paul. They let him take his hard stands against stuff like, maybe the National Defense Authorization Act, for example, but they let him do that because they know it's going to pass anyway. So it doesn't matter if Rand comes out and is a very strong opponent of these things. Now, Amash, however, doesn't really seem to have any deals like that worked out with leadership in the House. He seems to really be operating off on his own and not really doing as he's told. He's not really he's not playing the game very well in D.C., which I watched an interview with him on Jake Tapper this morning, and that seemed to be his main complaint. He really didn't like the game. He went to Washington and he hoped, naively, that he and other good, well-intentioned people could try and change the game from the inside, and that really hasn't worked out for him. And so in that case, he'd much rather not really have any sort of party ties weighing him down so he can feel free to sort of speak his mind. But again, that's going to cost him politically quite a bit, because now he's trying to run as an independent. Now he is an incumbent, which helps quite a bit. Certainly a lot easier than running as an independent for the first time, against an incumbent like, say, Bernie Sanders did when he was a member of Congress. And considering that Amash has gotten a lot of national attention for, I guess I wouldn't call him an active, never Trump type guy. I don't think he was involved with those folks, but he certainly has been very sympathetic to the impeachment mongers, which is certainly something I disagree with him on. But because of this national attention, he may be able to inadvertently fundraise from the Trump derangement syndrome people, because he's a congressman who, is seen as sort of an anti-Trump maverick, kind of like how all the real, lefty bleeding hearts all of a sudden loved, the great warmonger and advocate of mass murder, John McCain, after he died, because, hey, he was seen as standing up to that evil Hitlerian Trump. And so maybe, at least for this cycle, Justin Amash will be able to fundraise through, sort of I guess you could say, like a national donor drive. And I think if I were him, I would be buying ads not locally to try and get people to donate to me. I'd be trying to, campaign as much as I can, be very active on social media, and constantly link to where people can donate, because it's going to be very tough for him to take on a Republican and a Democrat challenger in his district, assuming that both parties put up a candidate. Our system in this country is definitely rigged against third-party and independent candidates. But even though I disagree with him on that one minor issue of the impeachment thing, which, again, the president's not going to be impeached anyway, so it's not a real big issue that he supports it. Overall, though, I really think that we should have more truly independent members of Congress. I think that it would be better if you have a little bit more of variety as far as points of view go in the Congress, not just two. two points of view which, for the most part, are pretty homogenized and not that different from each other on a lot of issues. I mean, that's why I'm happy that Bernie is in the Senate, even though he's on a lot of issues the worst senator in American history. He may be a dirty commie, but at least he's his own man. Well, at least until recently. He's kind of, with his latest presidential campaign, old Sanders is becoming a bit more of a politician, which is a bit disappointing, I'm sure, for his fans. But Amash, for better or for worse, seems to actually believe the things he says, and that's something I really respect in a man. I think that Amash is the kind of guy that, if the U.S. had worked out the way that the Founding Fathers had it intended, I think he would be a model congressman. I think that he would be the rule, not the exception, as he is here in this case, because he still seems to me, at least for what whether you agree with this position or not, he seems to be primarily focused on upholding his oath to the Constitution, and he has a pretty strict interpretation of the Constitution. Now, I'm not too concerned about that myself, because I think we're kind of past the point of trying to save the Constitution. I think that it's been shredded for over 100 years at this point, and that we're not really going to be able to get back to what the founders intended. But I do respect that kind of very nerdy patriotism. And another thing, in that interview with Jake Tapper, Tapper asked him if he would rule out running for president in 2020 as a libertarian or something, and he didn't rule that out, although I think that would be a big mistake for Amash. I think that he's much better off trying to capitalize on fame that he's gotten in the last couple months and try and use that to raise enough money to actually win re-election as an independent. He would be the first independent man in the House since Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders was you really don't see independent House of Representatives candidates. You see it more commonly at the Senate level. And even there, it's extremely rare in the United States to have independent politicians that make it anywhere other than, even city councilmen, it's kind of tough to get elected as an independent. So I wouldn't waste his time. If I were him, I wouldn't waste my time on some vanity campaign, because you're not going to convince the American people at this point, because especially as long as Trump is in office, things are very binary in this country as far as people are concerned. They view things through the lens of, do you like Trump or do you not like Trump? And for, folks on both sides, really, that's the most important issue, and that's all that matters. And that really is clouding a lot of our politics. You can't really have an honest debate right now, which is in some ways a good thing and in some ways a bad thing. In the case of Amash's idea of running for president to try and change people's minds, certainly he wouldn't run to win, but to try and make his case about what he thinks the country should be like, this is not the time to do it. I would say sit as an independent in Congress for a few years if you can hold out and build up a reputation, kind of like Ron Paul did. And because Amash is a young guy, so if he could sit around and kind of do the Ron Paul thing and just be the one man in the corner speaking sense into a microphone, well, then eventually he'll get a bit of a following and he can make his presidential bid. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.